With our to-do item display component set up and it rendering inside of our app.js right here, and with a little dummy data that allows us to kind of show how this component might work once we start loading real data into it, we're going to focus a little bit here on the component itself and the JSX that gets rendered into HTML when the component gets compiled and rendered into our HTML document as part of the app. Now, important concept to understand when we are working with our components and we're working with the JSX that gets output by the component is showing and hiding parts of the component itself by showing and hiding the JSX that we are putting out into the display. Now, I already have the application up and running, and if we go to Google Chrome and then we open up our localhost 3000, we see our application here and we see our to-do item. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit so that we can see all this stuff a little bit bigger. All right, we got our to-do item right there, and it is what is being rendered right here in the app. All right, so in to-do items, we usually have the ability to turn them on and off based on a checkbox for them being completed. In other words, when we have a list, we want to be able to click on them to show that they are complete, and then we would like them removed from the list. Now, since we haven't implemented our list component yet, we're going to focus just on how would we show or hide a particular to-do item based on some attribute inside of our to-do. Here we've got our to-do data model that we've been building as we've built this. And right now, of course, it is just a dummy data, so we can see this component working. We're going to add another attribute to our data model, and it is going to be the complete attribute. And we are going to set it to false to begin with. In other words, it is not complete. And down here, we're going to see how we might use an attribute of the object that we are rendering using this to-do item display, in this case a to-do. We're going to show how using this particular attribute, the complete, false, or true, can show or hide this particular to-do item so that it doesn't show up inside of our HTML. And we can do this pretty simply by using the true or false that's contained within this attribute down here inside of our JSX. And there are a couple of different ways we can do this. We could show or hide just the text we have in here, but if we did that, we would still have this div, which might cause some problems in our display if it is rendered as a block based on the class, the CSS class. We might have some space between to-do items. So most of the time, when we want to completely hide a particular to-do item, we'll probably want to hide all of the JSX so that no HTML gets output into our browser. And so right here, we can see we've got this div class to-do item display with our to-do item. If we were to just hide the HTML itself or just the text itself, we would still have this div floating inside of our HTML, and we probably wouldn't get the effect we want. So what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and we are going to hide all of this if this complete is set to true. And if it is set to false, we want to show all of it. So now we ask ourselves, how would we go about doing that? What's an effective way of doing that? Well, we know that inside of JSX, we can use JavaScript code simply by using the curly braces. As we did right down here, we were able to do a to-do item, which is regular JavaScript object right here, and we could do to-do.name in order to access this attribute of that particular object. And if we like to show or hide things, usually we're going to do an if, and then we would do to-do dot complete But if we do that right here above our JSX, we can see that it's not going to work. Even if we went down here and put another curly brace down here, really there's no way to kind of terminate that if statement if we do it this way. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to find a common way for hiding the JSX inside of our components. Now, to help us learn to better Google search when we've got or when we run into questions like this, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to run through how we might do that when we're on our own and we don't have a tutorial to follow. So what we would most likely do is go to Chrome, open up a browser, and then a good way to formulate the search that we're looking for would be React show hide JSX. And with a show hide JSX, we're probably going to get some pretty good posts up here. And you can see that actually inside of our react.js.org documentation, there is a whole section on conditional rendering. So if we open up that React documentation and we come down here and look at this, we can see that there are a couple of different ways to go about rendering the JSX in our component. And here we can see we've got two functional components right here. This one returns this JSX right here. This one returns the JSX right here. And then down here, we can see another functional component which determines which of these components up here, in other words, this parent component, will determine which of these components are actually visible when it returns its JSX. Now, being that we're dealing with a simple functional component, and we've got a return right here, just like these ones, but instead of returning subcomponents or child components, we're just going to be returning actual JSX. Well, we can do that with this similar syntax right here. And we can do that simply by putting our code back the way it was before we started messing with it. And we can do this right here. We can say if todo.complete, and if it's complete, we're going to return just simply an empty JSX. So we don't want to send anything back to the user. So instead of using that, we're just going to return null. Oops, we're going to return null. And then if the todo.complete is not true, it will return this JSX down here. Now the reason why I'm returning null is because we really don't want anything to be displayed where this to-do item is if it is complete. We want all of that HTML that we have right here, we want all of this removed from the display. So let's go ahead and save this, let it compile. Let's go back to our page, and you can see the to-do item is right here. And that is because currently our complete is set to false, meaning that this code did not run. It was bypassed, and this code was run. Therefore, the JSX was returned, compiled, and turned into HTML right here. Now, if we change this to true, we let it compile, and we come back, we'll see that our to-do item is gone. If we check our root and we look at our app component right here, we see that there is absolutely no JSX in there for our to-do item. That is because null was returned, and when no JSX is returned by our component, of course, there's no HTML to be rendered. Now, this is kind of a contrived example because we're using a dummy to-do item right now, and we have to manually change this data right here in the to-do item in order to see this particular to-do item show and hide. Now, as we get deeper into our build out of this to-do application, we're going to see that eventually we're going to be passing to-dos dynamically to our to-do item display, and from that dynamically passed in to-do item, we will then show or hide our user interface for that to-do item based on whether it is complete or not. And we'll get to that in an upcoming screencast. So here we've hidden all of the JSX for our application. Now, if we wanted to do something else, we could just hide the portion of the component that we wanted to hide. And in this case, it doesn't make sense to just hide the to-do name, but I'm going to show you how to do that anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this code out. And with that, we should see the to-do item all the time, even when this is set to true. So if I save it, come back, we'll see the to-do item is still there. Now, if we want to hide the to-do name only, but we still want the div to show up, which doesn't make any sense, but I just want to show you how we can show only portions of our JSX. We can still use this complete attribute of the to-do, and we can do that here with a ternary operator. So a ternary operator, we can say if to-do.complete, so if it's complete, we ask the question right there. If it's complete, then we want to show null. Otherwise, we want to show the to-do.name. So really, the question comes down to the question mark right here. You might want to put an if right here because you're used to doing that. But really, since we're using the ternary operator is simply the question mark with the colon. And the question mark refers to whatever precedes it. If we remember from when we learned JavaScript about the ternary operator, we're checking this condition here to see if it's true or false. If it's true, this condition or this statement will be executed. If it's false, then this one will be executed. So let's go ahead and see what happened here. As you can see, we still have that HTML here for the to-do item, but the text is gone from it. So if we come back here, we set this back to false so that it is not complete, re-render, and the text is back. All right, so we've seen a couple of ways to do this, and this might come in handy with the ternary operator. This might come in handy if you have a component that you are displaying some data and at other times not displaying data within that component. So you still want the component to show up on the screen, but you're only going to show and hide different parts of the component. And that might be useful with our to-do item if we had a checkbox that allowed us to see details. Because remember, our to-do item also has a description. So we could actually have a checkbox that when checked actually shows the description, and then when unchecked hides the description. That's where a ternary operator would come in handy. And then for the complete, we could still use this for showing and hiding it being complete. And instead, if we went down here, let's kind of do what we said we were going to do. Let's say that the to-do name always is seen, but the description is only seen, well, we're going to need a different variable that controls whether or not to show the description. So let's do something different here, and let's say, because right here our complete is going to show whether or not we show the to-do item, and that's what this one does for us. And now we're just worried about whether or not we're going to show the description. So let's say within our component, we're going to have some kind of functionality that would handle whether or not the description is shown. So right now, since we're just kind of testing this out and figuring out our user interface, we're going to create a quick variable. So let show description equal, let's do true to start out with. And then let's take this show description, and instead of to-do.complete, let's go ahead and set that. Now if we come back here, we'll see our to-do item. We won't see a description in here. And we got that set to to-do description. All right. And our complete is false. So now if we change our complete to true, that entire to-do item gets removed from our app. You can see we don't have the HTML anymore. So let's change this back to false so we can get our to-do item back. Get our to-do item back right here. Now let's talk about the description. Right now we're saying show description, and it is set to true. We've got our show description right here. And it doesn't look like our description is actually being shown. So let's look at this really quick. We've got our to-do description. It says this is a to-do item. Show description. We've got this reversed. If it says show description, we want this one to be executed and this one to not be, or this one to be executed when it is false. So we've just got these swapped around. So let's cut that. Let's put this one here, and then we'll of course show null right there. Now when we come back, we should see description. Ah, there we go. We've got the to-do item. So this is the name. And now we're actually showing the description. And of course, we're going to clean that up so that we can actually identify this is the name and this is the description. But right now, for this purpose, we're just going to go ahead and show how this works. So let's set this to false, and let's see if the description disappears. And the description is gone. Now, because this variable is inside of our component, that means we could implement something like an onClick on this particular item, and then have this change from false to true, and then have the description show. And then when somebody clicks on this, it would then, of course, change this from true to false, and the description would disappear again. Now, this has helped us identify how we might hide the entire component user interface and how we might hide certain portions of the component interface. And of course, as we get more complex in this and as the to-do item begins to be passed into these, as we build our list component, you'll get to see how we modify this code to begin to work with a to-do that gets passed in rather than a dummy to-do.